Hello! Today I want to talk a bit about the importance of telelenses for landscape and cityscape photography and why I consider my Canon 7200 f4 lens here equally important as my 1635 wide-angle lens. When I started with photography roughly 9 years ago, the first lens I bought was a Tamron 70-55mm lens. With this lens, which is roughly a 27 to 88mm full-frame equivalent, I was able to explore different angles, different perspectives. It let me shoot a little wider, but also zoom into a scene for an extent. But for landscape photography it was also a little bit boring, because it didn't allow me to explore perspectives out of the normal. To exaggerate the perspective in my landscape photos and take photos where I had a subject close to the lens and then a wide landscape extending behind it, I needed a wide-angle lens. Such photos can draw the viewer in. They often appear very dynamic and are maybe the most typical landscape photos nowadays, which again can sometimes make them boring, especially if a certain scene has been photographed that way a million times or if the light just doesn't fit the scene well. I'd say that still 80% of my photos are taken with a wide-angle lens though. But to bring some diversity into my portfolio, the other 20 are taken with a telelens. I no longer possess a normal lens. When I decided that I could no longer bring 3 lenses into my photo trips because of weight, I sold it. So why do I think a telelens is more important to own than a normal lens? I'd even say it's equally important for landscape photographers to own as a wide-angle lens. For a start, let's look at some cityscape photos which I took on a recent trip to Rome. I think a telelens can be essentially beneficial when photographing cities. When I explore different viewpoints, it can be very helpful to zoom in a bit and look for details. With often so many buildings, streets and people around, a wide-angle composition is not always possible. In such cases, I like to put on the telelens and explore with it. The details you see through such a lens are often something you can make out with your bare eyes, which in my opinion makes such photos special. For cities in particular, I also like how a long lens lets you align so many interesting elements so close to each other by compressing the perspective. Lining up different buildings, towers, churches, and positioning them in a frame can be like a puzzle, and I enjoy this process of finding the perfect balance. It also allows me to set a strong focus. While a wide angle and normal lens often include a lot from foreground to background and to the sides, which also has its advantages, zooming in can really point the viewer to certain elements or buildings. In this case here, the Ponte San Angelo and the Vatican with St. Peter's Basilica behind it. There are a few things to keep in mind though when taking photos of cities with a telelens. For one thing, the photos will look much less dynamic as if taken with a wider lens. It's much harder to bring diagonals into the frame and lead the viewer using those. When photographing cityscapes with a longer lens, you'll have much more horizontals and verticals in the frame. But this is not a bad thing at all. You just have to look for patterns and repetition, which also draws the viewer, as for example the city lights in this photo of Prague here, which symmetrically leads to the center. Besides that, it helps to position important elements in different areas of the frame to let the viewer jump between them, or, as in this example, to position them dead center to draw the viewer in. But a telelens is not only for cityscapes. I also love to use it for my landscape photography, although not as much as for cityscapes. But I often try to get a few teleshots in addition to the wider photos I've taken in order to get a more balanced portfolio and also to show a bit more details. When we visited Milford Sound a few years ago, I first took the typical wide-angle photo, showing the mountains and the fjord. But the next day, during a boat tour, I only used the telelens, which allowed me to reveal additional details. This waterfall, Sterling Falls, for example, was also visible in the wide-angle photo, only much farther away. Another reason why I like to take telephotos from time to time is that they let me get a unique photo even if I don't have a spectacular sky, which is often what I'm looking for when taking wide-angle photos. For this photo of Valle de la Luna, for example, I only needed a clear sky and some golden light during sunset. On other occasions, there might be too many distracting elements in a scene, which can make it impossible to use a wide lens. This photo, taken near Mila in Australia, was all about the rolling hills and the light. I didn't need a foreground, and with a fence right in front of my tripod and a road to the left of the scene, it also wouldn't have made sense to try it. A telelens can simplify a scene. It helps you to remove elements from the frame which don't add to the photo. More so, it forces you to do so, which can sometimes be a challenge, but in a good way, since it makes you think harder about a scene and what it is that really makes you want to take a photo of it. In this example, which I took on a rainy day in Saxony, Switzerland, it was all about the colors and the contrasts between the red to one side and the cyans and greens on the other for me. I didn't need to include more on the frame. There are certainly more reasons to have a telelens in the back, but I stop here and leave the rest for you to find out. I hope this video gave you some inspiration to consider a telelens. Also, it doesn't have to be the most expensive lens to start with. Take my Canon 7200 f4IS for example. It's been around for 10 years and I own this lens for 7. If you don't need image stabilization, you can get it for $600, and if you buy it used, even less. Also, even on my 50 megapixel 5 DSR, this lens here is still pin sharp, and I'm sure other brands have similar lenses in a similar price range. And if you're uncertain, just borrow a lens, give it a try, and see if a telelens is the right thing for you.